Early in the morning before sunrise, an elderly widow went out for a walk to find some peace when her flashlight suddenly hit something strange and shiny. Taking a few more steps, she found two motorcycles and two Hell's Angels lying unconscious on the wet ground. Unable to leave them there, she used her late husband's old snowmobile to bring them back to her cabin, despite her neighbors' protests and demands to send them away. What she didn't know was that her kind and courageous decision that morning would change her life forever. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The morning came like it always did in Greenwood Valley, quiet, blue, and a little brittle around the edges. The first hint of daylight slid down the mountain ridge, catching the frost on the branches until the trees looked dusted with glass. Somewhere below, the valley still slept under its blanket of fog. Elena Thompson closed the door to her cabin and paused on the porch. She listened for the sound that always greeted her, the slow hiss of the wind through greenwood needles, the creak of the old weather vane on the shed roof. She tightened the scarf under her chin and looked toward the narrow mountain road that curved like a gray ribbon down the slope. 5:30 a.m. on the dot. She was never late for her walk. The habit had started after Rock died. People in town said it wasn't safe for a 78-year-old widow to walk that road before dawn, but they didn't know Elena's reasons. She didn't walk for safety or health. She walked for order. Routine kept the grief tidy, as she sometimes told herself. Her boots crunched over the frozen gravel. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs, and she found comfort in that little ache. It made her feel alive. She carried a small canvas satchel slung across her shoulder, a thermos of hot tea, a flashlight, a folded wool blanket, and an old first aid kit wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Rock's sled leaned against the shed, its wooden frame silvered by years of sun and snow. She brushed her gloved hand over it every morning, as if greeting an old friend. "Morning, Rock," she whispered. "Don't fuss, I won't fall." Then she started down the road. The mountain road cut through tall firs that whispered overhead. The smell of greenwood sap mixed with faint exhaust from logging trucks that sometimes passed during the week. Today there was nothing, no sound but her boots and the small ticking of ice melting from a branch. Elena counted her steps like she used to count heartbeats during night shifts in the old field hospital, steady, methodical, a rhythm that kept her centered. She had served 2 years as a nurse during the Korean War, and though most of the town didn't know, it had shaped every inch of her. She still read medical journals once a week, the kind printed on thin paper that smelled of ink and disinfectant. Sometimes, late at night, she practiced stitching on torn dish towels, her hands remembering movements learned half a century ago: steady needle, clean line, tie it off neat. Half a mile down she saw the faintest mark on the road, 2 dark streaks curving out of the bend like black claws. She slowed. They weren't there yesterday. Skid marks. The sun wasn't up yet, and the light had that dim metallic hue that made distances lie. She pulled the small flashlight from her pocket and clicked it on. The beam caught something glinting further down, a shard of chrome, the curved edge of a mirror maybe. Her stomach tightened. She moved faster, her boots crunching over gravel, her breath showing in quick clouds. At the bend, the road widened slightly before dropping into a shallow ditch. The snow there was churned and dirty, tire ruts slicing through it. And in the ditch, 2 motorcycles lay on their sides, heavy and gleaming in the weak light. Gasoline shimmered on the surface of a puddle beside them. 2 men were on the ground. One sprawled near the bikes, face pale, jacket stiff with frost. The other lay half-twisted, a dark helmet beside him. "Lord help us," she whispered. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She clicked off the flashlight, crouched beside the nearer man, and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Faint pulse, slow, shallow. She unzipped his jacket, felt the icy skin beneath. His lips were blue. She turned her head toward the other one, the bigger man, built like a tree trunk under his leather. His eyes fluttered open as she leaned over him. "Can you hear me?" she asked. He grunted, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "Don't call cops." She almost smiled. The voice was hoarse but alive. "I'm not calling anyone yet," she said softly. "Tell me your name." He blinked unfocused. "Gary." "All right, Gary, can you move your legs?" He tried, winced. "Yeah, feels like hell though." "That's good news," she said. "You can feel it. What about your friend?" Gary's eyes shifted weakly toward the other man. Peter. He's worse. Elena crawled over, her knees sinking into the slush. Peter's skin was gray, his pulse faint under her fingertips. Hypothermia, most likely. She remembered the early stages, shivering, confusion, and the late ones, silence, slipping pulse, heart irregular as a broken watch. She looked around. The road was empty. The nearest house was over a mile down. The hospital, 20. She had no cell phone reception here. Her breath came out in a white cloud. If she stayed and waited for help, they'd die before the sun cleared the ridge. Her mind sharpened the way it used to during triage. Airway, clear. Breathing, shallow but there. Circulation, weak. Both needed warmth, fluids, shelter. The fear crept in when she saw the emblem on their jackets, a skull with wings and the words Hell's Angels. For a heartbeat she froze. Every rumor she'd ever heard rushed back. The fights, the drugs, the trouble they brought into small towns. She looked at Gary's cracked lips, at Peter's trembling fingers. They were still human fingers, still lips turning blue from cold. Damn the rumors, she muttered. She checked Gary's pupils again, steady as a metronome. You listen to me, she said, her tone shifting into command. You're both in shock and hypothermic. I'm taking you up to my cabin. Gary's hand shot out weakly, catching her wrist. Don't. I'm not asking, she said. You can talk or you can live, pick one. He blinked at her, confusion giving way to something like respect. You're crazy. Maybe, she said. But I know what I'm doing. The path home was uphill, about half a mile of packed snow. She couldn't carry them, not both. But she could drag. Elena jogged back up the road toward her cabin, her legs burning with cold. The sky was turning from steel to pale rose. She threw open the shed door, scattering dust motes into the light. The sled waited, half buried under a tarp and a coil of rope. Rock's old freight sled. He'd used it every winter to haul firewood, laughing as it screeched downhill like a stubborn mule. She grabbed it, heart hammering. The wood was dry but sturdy. She checked the runners, found them smooth enough. She tied the rope into a harness around her waist. Still with me, Rock, she murmured. One more haul. When she returned, Gary was trying to sit up. He looked worse in the daylight, blood at his temple, breath fogging in weak bursts. Don't move, she ordered. You'll make it worse. He tried a smirk. You bossy with everyone. Only the ones still breathing. She spread the blanket on the sled, then knelt beside Peter. He was light, barely more than a boy when she looked close. Early 20s maybe, freckles hidden under grime. She lifted him as gently as her old back allowed, gritting her teeth, easing him onto the sled. Then she turned to Gary. You next, she said. No way, get him first. He's already on, I'm taking both of you. You can't pull that weight, watch me. He stared, then gave a faint incredulous laugh that turned into a cough. Lady, you're something else. She looped the rope across her chest and leaned forward. The sled moved an inch, then another. The snow gave way with a hiss. Her breath puffed in rhythmic bursts, arms pumping, boots digging into the ice. Every few yards she stopped to catch her breath, checking that both men still breathed. The world had narrowed to sound and movement, the scrape of runners, the whistle of wind, her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her muscles screamed, but there was a clarity to it, a sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Step. Breathe. Count to 40. Again. When the cabin roof finally came into view between the trees, the sun had risen high enough to paint the valley gold. Inside the air was cold but dry. She cleared space near the fireplace, dragging the rug aside, setting up the folding cot she used when her niece visited. She piled wood into the hearth and struck a match. The flames caught, snapping to life with a dry pop. She moved quickly, every motion sure and practiced. Wet boots off, jackets open, hot water bottles filled from the kettle. She laid Gary on the couch, Peter on the cot. The cabin smelled of greenwood smoke and old wool. Elena wrapped Peter in layers of blankets, tucking them under his chin like a child. She lifted his wrist, counting pulse aloud. 64, 68 good. Gary tried to speak. You some kind of nurse, was she said. Still am when needed. He stared at her with bleary eyes. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. She poured hot tea into a mug, slipped a spoon of honey into it. Because you're here, she said simply, and I was here. He let out a low chuckle that turned into a sigh. We bring trouble, ma'am. Then you'll leave it outside, she replied. Hours passed in a rhythm of care, checking pulse, rotating warm bottles, feeding sips of tea. The fire kept the room at a steady heat, and outside, the snow began to fall again. Quiet soft flakes melting against the window glass. Every so often, she'd catch her reflection in the window, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with the old alertness she hadn't felt in years. The same look Rock used to tease her about after a long shift. You glow when you work, he used to say. Like a lantern. She smiled faintly at the memory. By late afternoon, both men were breathing easier. Peter's color had returned to a faint pink. Gary had managed to sit up, his big hands cupping the mug she'd given him. Outside, tire tracks on the road were already half covered by snow. Soon someone would find the abandoned bikes, there would be questions, sirens maybe. But that was a problem for later. For now there was only this small warm room. She refilled the fire, stirred the coals, then looked at them both. You're safe here, she said softly. Gary glanced at her, his expression uncertain, then nodded. Thanks, ma'am. Peter, still half asleep, murmured something that sounded like church. Elena smiled. Close enough. Outside, night settled slow and deep over Greenwood Valley. The snow fell heavier now, cloaking the world in quiet. Inside the cabin, the firelight flickered against the log walls, and for the first time in years, Elena felt the room alive with more than just memory. She sat back in Rock's old chair, watching the two men breathe. Her body ached from the haul, her arms trembling slightly as the fatigue set in. But her mind was clear, she had done what needed to be done. Tomorrow the world might question her decision, might call her reckless or foolish. But tonight, she felt something stronger than fear, a calm certainty, the kind that came from choosing compassion over caution. She reached for her mug of tea, its warmth steady in her palms. Good night, Rock, she whispered. Looks like we've got company. The fire popped once, sending up a brief shower of sparks that drifted like tiny stars before fading into the dark. Morning came quietly, gray light spilling through the window panes like watered milk. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving a soft white hush over Greenwood Valley. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned low, a nest of red embers breathing steady warmth into the room. Elena Thompson stirred awake in Rock's old chair. Her neck ached from sleeping upright, and the wool blanket around her shoulders had slipped to the floor. For a few moments she didn't move, listening to the rhythm of the cabin, the ticking of the mantel clock, the faint whistle of wind through the chimney, the slow, even breathing of the two men she had saved. Gary lay on the couch, one arm draped across his chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm. Peter, smaller and younger, was curled on the cot, mouth slightly open, lashes dark against his skin. They both looked startlingly young in the morning light, stripped of their noise and danger. Just men. Just human. She rose carefully, knees stiff from cold, and moved toward the stove. The kettle sat where she'd left it, half full. She lit the burner, the faint click-click whoosh of the flame breaking the silence. The smell of hot metal and greenwood smoke filled the room. Her hands moved by memory, measure coffee, pour water, stir honey. She thought about Rock again, the way he used to hum while the coffee percolated. Music makes the morning sweeter, he'd say. She caught herself humming now, a quiet, tuneless thing that barely touched the air. When she turned, Gary's eyes were open. You're real, he said hoarsely. I was last time I checked, she said, pouring him a mug. Drink slow, it's hot. He took it with both hands. His fingers were thick, scarred, trembling slightly as he raised it. Where are we? My cabin. Greenwood Valley Ridge. He looked around the room, blinking as if the wood walls might explain something. You hauled us here, with Rock's sled, his brow furrowed. You coulda died doing that. She set another mug on the table, but I didn't. Drink. He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once, a tiny concession to the absurdity of gratitude. You got a first name. Elena. He blinked. That's a mouthful. Most people just say Ellie. Gary, he said, tapping his chest. Peter's my brother in the club. He's still out. Sleeping, she said softly. He's stable, fever's down. You both had hypothermia, possible concussion. You're lucky I found you when I did. Gary stared into the coffee as if the dark liquid might replay the accident for him. We were coming down from the pass, road iced up, didn't even see the curve till. He stopped, jaw tightening. Elena waited. He shook his head. He went down hard. I tried to brake, but... His voice cracked, low and angry. She saw the same helplessness she'd seen in soldiers decades ago, the shame of surviving when someone else didn't, even if everyone did. You both lived, she said gently. That's what matters today. He nodded once, unable to look at her. By noon Peter had woken. His first words were slurred and confused. Where am I? In my home, Elena said, kneeling beside him. You're safe. His gaze darted around the cabin, to the fire, to Gary. We crashed. Yeah, kid, Gary said quietly. You gave us a scare. Peter tried to sit, winced and sank back. Hurts. Good, Elena said, smiling faintly. Means you're alive. He stared at her, unsure if she was joking. She pressed a hand to his forehead, warm but no fever now. The boy smelled faintly of smoke and engine oil, and under that, the human smell of fear. She felt a wave of pity so strong it made her throat tighten. You'll be all right, she said softly. Just rest. Outside, the world brightened. The clouds thinned, and sunlight scattered across the snow until it dazzled the eyes. She shoveled a path to the woodpile, the shovel biting into the crust with crisp, rhythmic scrapes. She felt every pull in her back, every tremor in her arms. But each motion steadied her, gave her the calm of usefulness. When she came back in, Gary was sitting up, watching her with something close to guilt. You didn't have to do this, he said. Maybe not, she said. Stacking logs near the hearth, but I wanted to. He rubbed a hand over his face. We're not the kind of men people help. I didn't see that written on your forehead. He gave a small laugh, dry as kindling. You got no idea who we are. She looked up. You're cold, hurt and alive. That's all I need to know. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft pop of the fire and the faint creak of the logs settling. Gary broke first. You're something else, lady. I've been called worse, she said. By late afternoon, she began preparing soup. The smell of onions and thyme filled the cabin, wrapping the air in something domestic and safe. Peter stirred from the cot, blinking against the light. That smells real good, he murmured. She smiled. That's because it's real food. You're both lucky I still cook. Gary leaned back on the couch, eyes half closed. Lucky ain't a word I hear much. Then start using it, she said. She ladled soup into 3 bowls, setting them on the small table by the window. Peter shuffled over, moving like a man half made of bruises. He hesitated before sitting, glancing at Gary as if asking permission. It's fine, Gary said. They ate in silence at first. Outside, wind whistled through the eaves. Inside, spoons clinked softly. After a while, Peter spoke. You live up here alone. Been that way since my husband passed, she said. Must get quiet. Sometimes. Gary looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. Why keep living up here? Town's not far, you could move closer to people. She shrugged. People are noisy. Besides, I like the quiet. I know what it's saying. What's that? Peter asked. She smiled. That I'm still here. The boy smiled back, slow and genuine. They slept most of the evening. Elena cleaned her tools, repacked the medical kit, then sat by the fire, reading an old nursing manual. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and fine. Around midnight, she heard a distant rumble, engines, several of them, echoing faintly through the valley. She looked out the window, but saw nothing through the drifting snow. Probably trucks, she thought. But her chest tightened anyway. She banked the fire, and went to bed. By morning the road below the ridge wasn't empty anymore. 2 sheriff's cruisers idled near the ditch, their red and blue lights faint in the distance. She saw them through her binoculars as she stood on the porch, the cold air biting her cheeks. They'd found the bikes. Her stomach knotted. She knew Sheriff Pete Hansen, solid man, decent, but quick to worry. Greenwood Valley wasn't used to trouble. 2 crashed motorcycles with Hell's Angels patches would stir the whole town. She went back inside. Gary was awake, pulling on his jacket, wincing with each motion. "Stay put," she said. "Cops are comin', right?" She hesitated. "Probably." He started pacing, jaw tight. "They see the bikes, they'll think we're runnin' from something. Are you?" He met her eyes. "No. But they'll think it anyway." She sighed. "Then you'd better sit down before you fall down." "I'll talk to Pete." He frowned. "You can't, I can." Her tone left no room for argument. By mid-morning, a truck crunched up the icy road. She stepped out onto the porch as Sheriff Hansen climbed from the cab. He was a broad man in his 60s, with a nose red from the cold, and a look that said he'd been awake too long already. "Ellie," he said, tipping his hat. "You seen anything strange up here? We found 2 bikes in the ditch. Thought I'd check in." She crossed her arms, the wind tugging at her coat. "They're inside, Pete. Alive, but hurt." His eyebrows shot up. "You're tellin' me you got Hell's Angels in your living room?" "I'm tellin' you I've got 2 patients." He stared at her for a long moment, jaw working. "Ellie, that's not smart." "They wrecked," she said evenly. "Would you rather I left them to die?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "You know I wouldn't, but those boys bring trouble. They're boys who needed help." Behind her the door creaked. Gary stood there, leaning against the frame. "Sheriff," he said quietly. Hansen's hand twitched near his belt, then relaxed. "Son, you stay right there. I ain't causin' no problem," Gary said. "We crashed. That's all." Elena stepped between them, her small frame somehow filling the space. "He's telling the truth, Pete." The sheriff looked from one to the other, his breath a white cloud. "You always were stubborn, Ellie. Someone has to be." He exhaled, long and heavy. "All right. I'll file it as an accident. But you call me if things turn sideways." She nodded. "Thank you." He tipped his hat again and walked back to his truck. That night, word had already spread through town. Greenwood Valley's rumor mill spun fast. The old widow with the cabin had taken in bikers. Some called her brave, others said foolish. Elena didn't care. She had a fire to tend, 2 men to heal, and a life to live, but still, she felt the weight of eyes she couldn't see. The days that followed fell into rhythm. She cleaned their wounds, changed bandages, kept them on light food. Gary began helping with chores, chopping wood, hauling water. Peter, when he was stronger, tried sketching the mountain view from the porch, using an old pencil he found near her sewing basket. "You draw?" she asked. He shrugged, embarrassed. "Just lines." "They're good lines," she said, smiling. He looked up at her, surprised by the simple praise. At night, when the wind howled down the ridge, they sat by the fire, and talked in low voices. Gary spoke about Afghanistan, about losing men, about coming home to nothing. Peter told of orphanages, and running away young, of the club being the only family that wanted him. Elena listened without judgment, her needle moving through cloth as they spoke. When they fell silent, she said softly, "Families come in all shapes, some just take longer to find." Gary nodded slowly. "Guess we found ours in a snowbank." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it found you." By the end of the week, the snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth and greenwood needles. The cabin felt less like a shelter, and more like a home. The men laughed sometimes now, quietly, as if surprised they still could. Elena noticed it, the way laughter changed a room's air. It made even the corners seem warm. But peace never lasted long in Greenwood Valley. On the morning of the 8th day, she heard engines again, many this time, deep and synchronized. She stepped outside, and saw a line of motorcycles crawling up the road, headlights piercing the mist. Gary stiffened beside her. "That's the club. Your friends." He hesitated. "Depends who's askin'." The bikes pulled up in front of the cabin, engines rumbling to a halt. A tall man dismounted first. Iron Roy Kowalski, his jacket heavy with patches. His face was hard, beard streaked with gray, eyes sharp as cold steel. He scanned the cabin, then Gary, then Elena. "You okay, brother?" Roy asked. Gary nodded. "We're good, wrecked bad. She saved us." Roy's gaze shifted to her. "She, huh?" Elena met his stare calmly. "That's right. You know who we are, ma'am. I can read." He smirked. "And you helped us anyway." "You were dying," she said simply. Didn't seem like much of a choice. Roy studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a deep surprised sound. "You got guts, lady."
"Had to,"
she said. "War teaches you that." "War, Korea. Field nurse. Long time ago." His smirk faded into something else. "Respect, maybe." "Well, hell," he said quietly. "Didn't see that comin'." They talked for an hour. Roy asked questions, half testing, half curious. Elena answered plainly. She explained the injuries, the treatment, the risks of moving them. Finally he said, "We'll take 'em home now." "They're not ready," she replied. "Give them one more night." He frowned. "They can rest at our place." "Not till I say so." Gary stepped forward. "She's right, Roy. Peter's still weak." Roy looked between them, then nodded slowly. "All right, one more night, then we're ghosts." He turned to his men. "No one talks about this. Understand, we don't make our problems hers." They nodded. Before leaving he looked back at her. "You ever need something, ma'am, you call the club. You've earned that." She gave a small smile. "I'll keep it in mind." When they rode away, the sound of their engines echoed through the valley like distant thunder. That night, as the firelight danced against the log walls, Elena sat in Rock's chair and watched Gary and Peter sleep again, peaceful now, unguarded. Her arms ached from the week's work, but her heart felt full. She reached for the small box on the mantel, Rock's tin, the one with the medal and the photo of their field unit. She ran her fingers over the worn metal, remembering his voice. "Do good where you stand, Ellie. That's all any of us can do." She smiled softly, eyes glinting in the firelight. "Still trying, Rock," she whispered. "Still trying." Outside, snow began to fall again, light and slow, like a curtain closing on the day. The snow was gone by the first week of spring. The mountain road that had once been a strip of ice was now a muddy scar winding down toward Greenwood Valley. Meltwater dripped from the eaves of Elena's cabin, and the first crocuses poked up through the soft earth near the porch. Inside, the smell of antiseptic had faded to coffee and wood smoke. The couch no longer looked like a hospital bed. The cot had been folded away. Gary still came by every few days to stack wood or fix something broken, and Peter had started to draw again, proper drawings now, on real paper instead of scrap. The world had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. It wasn't loneliness, it was contentment. Elena found herself waking before dawn just to sit by the window and watch the fog lift off the valley. Some mornings, she'd see the glint of sunlight on a passing motorcycle far below, and instead of fear she felt something like fondness. One afternoon, in early May, Gary arrived with a cardboard box full of supplies, bandages, disinfectant, and an envelope with her name scrawled in heavy letters. "What's this?" she asked, setting down her teacup. He rubbed the back of his neck. "From Roy. Says it's a thank you." We pitched in. She opened it, saw rolls of gauze, iodine, antiseptic wipes, even a new blood pressure cuff. Beneath it all was a folded note written in neat block letters, "For the lady who doesn't flinch. From those who do." Elena smiled. "Your friend has a way with words." Gary chuckled. "Roy don't say much, but when he does he means it." She looked up at him. "How's your daughter?" He hesitated, then grinned shyly. "Emma? She called me last week, said she's thinking about visiting." "That's good news." "Yeah, still don't know what to say to her." "Start with 'I missed you,'" she said gently. "The rest will come." Gary nodded, his voice low. "You sound like my mother." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said. A few days later, Peter stopped by carrying a roll of paper tucked under his arm. He was nervous, eyes darting like a boy bringing home a bad report card. "I made something," he said, handing it to her. She unrolled it on the kitchen table. It was a pencil sketch of her cabin at dawn, the slope of the roof, the old chimney, a small figure walking down the road with a satchel in her hand. The lines were soft, confident, alive. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Peter shrugged. It's just what I saw. You saw me. He nodded, looking embarrassed. You're always out there at sunrise, figured it was kind of your thing. She touched the corner of the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. You have a gift, Peter. He smiled faintly. Didn't think so till you said it. In early June, the quiet was broken again, this time by the low thunder of engines rolling up the road. Elena stepped onto the porch, squinting into the afternoon sun. It was Iron Roy and two other riders. They parked their bikes neatly in a line, dust settling around them like smoke. Roy pulled off his helmet, revealing a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Afternoon, ma'am. Mr. Kowalski, she said with a polite nod. Call me Roy. You still patchin' up fools. Only the ones who knock. He smiled. Fair. He followed her inside, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Gary and Peter arrived a few minutes later, the cabin suddenly full of motion and the faint smell of oil and leather. Roy looked around, hands on his hips. You got quite a setup here. Clean, organized. You sure you ain't running a clinic? Not officially, she said, but the rules are the same. Keep things sterile, don't waste bandages, no lying about pain. He grinned. You'd fit right in with us. She arched an eyebrow. Not sure the jacket would suit me. Roy laughed. Probably not. They talked for a while, about the accident, about the club, about how folks in town were still whispering. Roy listened more than he spoke, his gaze moving from Elena to Gary to Peter. Finally he said, You changed these boys. Elena smiled faintly. They did most of the work themselves. Nah, Roy said. You gave them something they didn't think they deserved. That's rare. She looked at him. Everybody deserves a second chance. He nodded slowly. Wish more people believed that. A silence fell, warm but heavy. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, the smell of rain drifting in through the open window. Roy reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a worn dog tag. You said you were in Korea. She nodded. He turned the tag over, reading the faint engraving. 51 to 53. My old man was there. Radio Corps. I was a nurse in a MASH unit near Seoul, she said softly. We patched up boys your father probably saw blown apart an hour before. He studied her for a long time. Guess we both come from the same kind of place, huh? The kind that leaves marks you can't see, she said. He nodded. Yeah. After the storm, the light turned gold. Roy and his men were preparing to leave when Peter brought out one of his sketches, a small drawing of a motorcycle beneath the mountains, with a tiny cross on the horizon. He held it out. For you. Roy took it, surprised. You draw this? Yeah. It's good, Roy said, folding it carefully. Real good. When they left, the valley felt quiet again, but not empty. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, listening to the crickets. On the table beside her lay Rock's old tin box. She opened it, the metal clicking softly in the dark. Inside was a photograph, her and Rock, both in uniform, standing in front of a canvas tent. She traced his face with her finger. His smile had always been crooked, one corner higher than the other. You'd like these boys, she whispered. They're rough around the edges, but they mean well. A gust of wind pushed against the window. She closed the box and set it aside, but her heart was restless. The truth was, the boys had awakened something she thought she'd buried years ago, the need to serve, to be useful, to keep people alive. It wasn't just kindness, it was purpose. 2 weeks later, she drove into town for supplies. Greenwood Valley's main street was small, one diner, a post office, a hardware store, and the sheriff's office. As she walked down the sidewalk, conversations dimmed. Heads turned. She kept her chin up. Inside the diner, she ordered her usual black coffee and a slice of lemon pie. The waitress, Carol, hesitated before setting it down. Ellie, she said quietly, folks are talkin'. They always are, Elena said. Carol sighed. Some think you're keepin' company with criminals. I'm keepin' company with human beings. Carol frowned. You're a good woman, but you're playin' with fire. Elena looked out the window, where a pair of teenagers on bicycles rode past, laughing. Kindness isn't fire, Carol. Fear is. Carol didn't reply. That night, Gary came by, looking uneasy. Roy says there's talk. Another club's been making noise. Riverside chapter. They don't like that we've been showing up in town helping folks. Helping. Yeah, he said with a shy grin. We fixed the roof on the church last weekend. Figured we owed you something. She smiled. That's a start. Maybe, he said. But the Riverside guys think it makes us soft. Kindness isn't soft, Gary. It's hard work. He nodded, but his jaw stayed tight. A week later, it happened. The sound of engines came again, but these were rougher, angrier, their roar echoing off the trees like thunder without rain. Elena stepped outside to see a group of riders stopping at the foot of her drive. Their jackets read Riverside Crew. Gary and Peter were already there, standing tense near the porch. Roy's men had arrived minutes earlier, their bikes lined like a wall between the cabin and the newcomers. The leader of the Riverside group, a broad man with a skull tattoo on his neck, swung off his bike. "Roy," he barked, "you outta your damn mind, workin' with townsfolk now." Roy's voice was calm. "Stand down, Skull. This ain't your business. Everything's my business when you're making us look weak." Elena stepped forward, her small frame barely reaching Skull's shoulder. "Gentlemen," she said, "this is private property. You'll keep your voices down." Skull stared at her, incredulous. "Lady, you got no idea who you're talking to." "Oh, I do," she said evenly. "You're someone who's forgetting his manners." A murmur ran through the riders. Roy's mouth twitched, half amusement, half warning. Skull stepped closer. "You really think you can change us? With soup and stitches?" "No," she said softly. "But I can remind you what you were before you forgot." He froze, the words landing harder than any threat. Behind him, Peter moved quietly to the porch. In his hands was a folder of drawings, the ones he'd been working on for weeks. Without a word, he opened it and let the wind scatter them across the ground. Sheets fluttered, sketches of the valley, of motorcycles, of faces laughing by a fire. One landed near Skull's boot, a drawing of a boy standing beside a man with a hand on his shoulder. The man looked like Skull. The yard went still. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Skull bent down, picked up the drawing, and stared at it. His jaw worked, his throat tight. "You drew this?" he asked. Peter nodded. "It's you, or who you used to be." Skull looked at him, then at Elena. The anger drained from his eyes, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Maybe," he muttered. "Maybe not." He turned to Roy. "We're done here." The Riverside crew rode off without another word, engines fading into the trees. When the sound was gone, the air felt enormous and still. Roy turned to Elena. "You just stared down Skull Rodriguez. You know that." She smiled faintly. "He was just loud, not dangerous." "Lady," Roy said, shaking his head, "you're the bravest person I ever met." "Not brave," she said quietly. "Just tired of watching people forget they're human." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "That's brave enough." That night, after everyone had gone, the cabin glowed with quiet. Elena sat by the window again, watching the moon rise over the ridge. The road below was empty now, washed clean by moonlight. She thought of Rock, his calm voice, his steady hands. She could almost hear him say, "You did good, Ellie. You kept the peace without firing a shot." She smiled, tears bright in her eyes. "Still doing good where I stand," she whispered. Outside, an owl called once, deep and low, before the night settled back into silence. Summer came early that year. The air over Greenwood Valley shimmered with heat, and the greenwood trees gave off that deep green smell that only came after long rain. Down in town, the diner had its windows open, and laughter carried up the hill like music. From her porch, Elena could hear it sometimes, faint, human, alive. She was sitting in Rock's old rocker, knitting a scarf she didn't need, when she saw a cloud of dust rising from the road. A line of motorcycles wound its way up toward her cabin, engines softer this time, less like thunder, and more like a hum. When they stopped, she counted 8 of them, familiar faces, cleaner jackets. The men climbed off their bikes, with a strange gentleness, as if careful not to disturb the quiet. Iron Roy was first. Gary and Peter followed, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "Morning, Miss Ellie," Roy said, removing his sunglasses. "Morning, gentlemen," she said. "What brings the cavalry today?" Gary smiled. "Peace offering, sort of a thank you too." Peter handed her the wrapped bundle. Inside was a framed drawing, her cabin in spring, smoke curling from the chimney, surrounded by greenwood trees that looked alive under a pale sunrise. It was her home, seen through someone else's heart. She looked up, eyes wet. "It's beautiful." Peter shuffled awkwardly. "It's yours. Thought you should have it." She smiled. I already did, you just reminded me. Later that week, the sheriff stopped by. He found her pruning wild flowers by the fence, humming softly. Ellie, Pete said, leaning against his truck. Heard what happened up here last month. Word travels fast, faster than engines, he said with a grin. Town's been talking. Funny thing, crime's been near zero lately. Folks say those bikers of yours are helping at the food pantry. Not mine, she said gently. They belong to themselves. He nodded. Maybe, but they sure act like they belong here now. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. Town council wants to recognize you at next week's meeting. Community Service Award. She blinked, surprised. For what? For reminding us what decency looks like. She chuckled. Pete, all I did was make soup and use a thermometer. He smiled. Sometimes that's all it takes. The town hall was full that evening. Folding chairs, the faint smell of coffee and floor polish. Elena sat in the front row, her hair brushed neat, Rock's silver cross pinned to her coat. People she hadn't spoken to in years came to shake her hand. Carol from the diner brought a bouquet of wild flowers. Even the mayor, a thin man, with a voice too big for the room, looked nervous as he read from his notes. When they called her name, she stood slowly and walked to the podium. The crowd clapped, not loud, but steady. She looked out and saw Gary near the back, his arm around a young woman, Emma. Peter stood beside them, wearing a clean shirt and holding a rolled-up drawing. Roy was by the door, arms crossed, trying to look unimpressed. Elena adjusted the microphone. I don't have much to say, she began. Her voice carried clearly, calm and sure. I didn't plan to be anybody's hero. I just saw two men who needed help. That's all. She paused, letting the silence settle. But I learned something after that day, that kindness doesn't end where fear begins. It grows there, if you let it. She glanced toward the back of the room. We don't get to choose who deserves compassion. We only get to choose whether we give it. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. Then the crowd rose to their feet, applause rippling like gentle rain. Gary wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. In the months that followed, the shape of Greenwood Valley began to change. The Hells Angels chapter that had once been feared now spent weekends fixing fences, repainting the school playground, and clearing snow from driveways in winter. People started calling them the Greenwood Valley Riders. Peter began teaching art classes at the elementary school. His students adored him, especially when he brought his bike helmet for them to paint. His drawings filled the hallways, bright, simple pictures of kindness. A woman handing soup to a stranger, a boy helping an old man up a step, a sunrise over a small cabin. Gary, true to his word, rebuilt his life piece by piece. Emma moved to Greenwood Valley to live with him. On Sundays, the two of them visited Elena, bringing fresh bread and laughter that filled the cabin. Feels strange, huh? He said once, setting the loaf on the table. What does? She asked. Being happy, she smiled. You'll get used to it. One crisp autumn evening Roy returned. No entourage this time, just him. The light was fading, gold streaks sliding down the ridge. He sat on the porch steps while Elena poured coffee. Heard about that award you got, he said. I didn't do it for that. I know, that's why it matters. They sat in silence for a while, watching the valley lights come on one by one. Roy cleared his throat. We're starting a volunteer thing. First aid runs, roadside rescues. Figured we could use some guidance. She looked at him. Guidance, yeah. Someone who knows what they're doing. Someone like you. She smiled softly. You don't need me to lead you, Roy. You just need to remember what you already learned. He nodded slowly. Still, would mean a lot if you'd come down to the station sometime. Teach the boys a few tricks. I'll think about it, she said. He grinned. That's all I can ask. Before he left he took off his leather vest and handed her a patch, a small embroidered emblem of wings rising from a wheel. For you, he said. Honorary member. No bike required. She held it carefully, fingers tracing the stitches. That's kind of you. He shrugged. You earned it. The years slipped by quietly after that. Winters came and went, each one softer than the last. The cabin filled with drawings, photographs, and thank you notes. She kept Rock's sled by the shed, polished and oiled, though she never needed it again. Sometimes she'd wake early and walk the old road, her breath fogging in the cold, the valley lights below her flickering like fireflies. Every now and then a motorcycle would pass, the rider lifting a gloved hand in greeting. She always waved back. 5 years later, when Elena turned 83, the state governor came to Greenwood Valley. The community had nominated her for a civic award for outstanding service and humanitarian dedication. The ceremony was held outside the courthouse. The sky was pale blue, a breeze moving gently through the flags. Peter spoke first, his voice steady but thick with feeling. "She saved us," he said simply. "But she also showed us how to save others. She didn't just patch our wounds, she fixed something in all of us." When Elena stepped up to accept the plaque, the crowd rose again, just as they had that first night in the town hall. She looked out at them, the riders, the townspeople, the sheriff, the children, and felt a quiet swell of peace. She didn't say much, just be kind. It's harder than it looks, and stronger than you think. After the ceremony, she stood alone for a moment, under the oak trees outside the courthouse. Gary came up beside her, Emma now grown tall and smiling beside him. "Town looks different, doesn't it?" he said. "Better," she said, warmer. "Guess that's your fault." She laughed softly. "Maybe it's yours." He hesitated. "We couldn't have done it without you." She looked out over the crowd, where Peter was showing his students how to take photographs of the flags. "You could have," she said. "You just needed someone to remind you." He nodded, eyes shining. "Still, thank you." She squeezed his hand. "Always." That winter Greenwood Valley got its first heavy snow in years. The mountains turned white again, the trees bending under the weight. The town buzzed with life, the riders helping stranded cars, Peter's students building snow lanterns, the church bell echoing across the valley. From her porch, Elena watched it all. Her breath came slow, her heart calm. She thought about Rock, about the boys, about the sound of engines and laughter carried on cold air. She felt no loneliness, only belonging. When the fire inside the cabin burned low, she stepped to the window, looking out at the falling snow. In the distance, headlights moved along the ridge, a single motorcycle climbing the road. The sound was deep, familiar, comforting. She smiled. "They're still out there," she whispered, "still doing good where they stand." She turned off the lamp, leaving the room lit only by the glow of the hearth. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, covering the road in a clean white path that led down toward the valley. Quiet, forgiving, eternal. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.